I am Francesca, 21, and my father used to be my hero. We had everything growing up: the mansion, luxury cars, vacations most people only dream about. When my parents divorced 3 years ago, things changed. Then Dad married Stephanie, 15 years his junior. But nothing prepared me for that moment at the airport, when he said those words and just walked away with his new family. What I did next shocked everyone, including myself. Tell me where you are watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button to hear how a father's betrayal led to the most unexpected revenge. I remember my childhood as a time filled with love and privilege. My father, Thomas Walker, built his real estate empire from the ground up, turning our family name into a synonym for success in Boston's competitive market. My mother, Eleanor, gave up her career as an interior designer to become the perfect supportive wife and mother. Our home was a showcase mansion in Brookline that frequently appeared in architectural magazines. Some of my fondest memories were the special moments with my father. On my 10th birthday, he surprised me with a small sailboat named Francesca's Freedom and taught me how to navigate the waters off Cape Cod. "You are going to be a great captain someday, my little captain," he would say as I gripped the wheel with determination. For my 16th birthday, instead of just handing me keys to a luxury car like my friends' parents did, he took me through the process of researching and selecting the right vehicle. "This is how we make smart decisions, Franny," he explained while we compared safety features and fuel efficiency. He wanted me to understand the value of things, not just enjoy them. When I graduated as valedictorian from my prestigious private high school, he was beaming with pride. "That speech was worthy of a Walker," he told me, his arm around my shoulders. "You have the brains for this business, Francesca. Someday, all of this will be yours to run." Our shared interest in business became our strongest bond. While other fathers and daughters watched movies or went shopping, Dad would take me to property viewings and investment meetings. By 17, I could analyze a property prospectus and identify promising investment opportunities. He introduced me to his business partners as the future of Walker Developments. Summer trips to our Cape Cod house were sacred family time. We would sail during the day and have long conversations on the deck at night. Dad would explain his business philosophy while we watched the stars. "Always build something that lasts," he would say. "Buildings, relationships, reputation quality endures." Looking back now, I can see there were warning signs I chose to ignore. The canceled dinners became more frequent. "Something came up at work, Franny." "Rain check." His distracted nods when I talked about school or friends. The way his phone became an appendage constantly buzzing with messages that made him step away from family gatherings. But when you idolize someone, you create explanations for their behavior. I told myself he was busy securing our future. I believed him when he said those missed dinners and absent weekends were necessary sacrifices for our family's continued success. I never imagined he was slowly pulling away from us, creating a different life altogether. The father who promised to always be there for me was already halfway gone, and I was too blinded by admiration to see it. The cracks in my parents' marriage became impossible to ignore when I was 16. Their arguments, initially confined to their bedroom, began spilling into other parts of the house. My mother would confront him about missed anniversaries and family events, while my father would dismiss her concerns as emotional overreactions. "You care more about that new development in Cambridge than your actual family," my mother shouted one night when she thought I was asleep. "This development is for our family, Eleanor. Everything I do is for this family." My father responded with that cold, logical tone that always shut down further discussion. My mother changed during this time. The confident, elegant woman who once hosted charity galas and maintained perfect composure in any situation began retreating into herself. She stopped attending social events with my father. Her designer clothes hung untouched as she spent days in the same sweatpants. The piano that she played beautifully gathered dust. Sometimes I would find her staring out the window, a glass of wine in hand, at 10 in the morning. "Mom, are you okay?" I would ask. "Just tired, sweetie," was always her answer, accompanied by a smile that never reached her eyes. During my senior year of high school, the tension in our home became unbearable. I threw myself into academics and extracurricular activities, finding excuses to stay at school late or visit friends. Home had transformed from a sanctuary to a battlefield I wanted to avoid. The real breaking point came a week after my 18th birthday. I borrowed my father's phone to call an Uber after mine died. A text notification popped up from someone saved as Steph that read, "Miss you already. Last night was amazing. Can't wait for Paris." My stomach dropped. Dad had just returned from what he claimed was a commercial property conference in New York. There was no mention of anyone named Steph, and certainly no mention of Paris. When I confronted him that evening, his reaction told me everything. No outrage at the accusation, no defensive explanation, just a dismissive wave of his hand. "Stephanie is a colleague, Francesca. She is helping with the European expansion. You are making something out of nothing," he said without meeting my eyes. "This is adult business. Focus on your college applications." 2 weeks later, my mother found credit card statements showing dinner reservations for 2 at romantic restaurants, hotel bookings in cities where my father claimed to be at business conferences alone, and a receipt for a woman's bracelet from Tiffany that was never given to her. The explosion that followed was nuclear. I came home from debate team practice to find my mother throwing my father's carefully tailored suits onto the driveway while he attempted to grab them from her. 18 years! Thomas! 18 years I gave you, and this is how you repay me!" she screamed, mascara running down her face. "Eleanor, stop this ridiculous display! The neighbors can see you!" he hissed, more concerned with appearances than her pain. That night, he announced they would be divorcing. He moved into the guest house the same evening, and our family as I knew it was officially over. My first year at Boston University coincided with my parents' divorce proceedings. While other freshmen were attending campus parties and making new friends, I was shuttling between my dorm room and my mother's new condo, trying to provide emotional support as her world collapsed. The divorce became increasingly ugly as it progressed. My father, the brilliant businessman, applied those same tactical skills to protecting his assets from my mother. His legal team discovered loopholes and employed delay tactics. Property that should have been considered marital assets was suddenly tied up in complex corporate structures. Bank accounts my mother thought were joint turned out to have restrictions she never knew about. "Your father emptied our vacation fund," my mother told me one evening, her voice hollow. 15 years of savings for retirement in Italy. Gone. My mother's attorney discovered offshore accounts. Properties transferred to business entities just months before the divorce filing. It was calculated deliberate financial manipulation. Meanwhile, my mother spiraled deeper into depression. There were days she couldn't get out of bed. The divorce had revealed not just my father's infidelity, but his systematic financial deception throughout their marriage. Her self-worth plummeted as she questioned how she could have been so blind for so long. "I gave up my career for him," she said during one particularly difficult evening. "I thought we were partners. I never even asked to see the tax returns." I found myself in an impossible position, torn between supporting my devastated mother and maintaining a relationship with my father. Despite everything, I still craved his approval and love. The business lessons, the sailing trips, the proud smiles, those memories didn't simply vanish because he had betrayed my mother. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my father invited me to dinner. "There's someone I want you to meet," he said with unusual hesitation in his voice. That someone was Stephanie Carson. 32 years old, blonde hair, expensive highlights, perfect makeup, ruthless ambition barely concealed behind a practiced smile. She was a successful real estate agent who had worked with my father on several development projects. The colleague from the text messages was now being introduced as his fiancée. More shocking than their engagement announcement was the revelation that Stephanie had 2 children from her previous marriage, Jackson 10 and Ashley 8. My father, who had always told my mother he didn't want more children after me, was suddenly embracing the role of stepfather with enthusiasm. "The kids adore Thomas," Stephanie said, placing her hand possessively on my father's arm. "He's such a natural father figure." The backhanded insult wasn't lost on me. The implication that his parenting skills were only now being properly utilized stung deeply. That first dinner was excruciating. Stephanie spoke to me as if I were a child rather than a college student. "Do you need help cutting that steak, Francesca?" she asked at one point, despite watching me competently handling my food. My father, once my strongest advocate, sat silently as his fiancée condescended to me. He laughed too loudly at her jokes and frequently checked for her approval before speaking. The powerful businessman I had admired all my life had been replaced by someone I barely recognized. Despite the discomfort, I made efforts to maintain a relationship with my father. I accepted invitations to dinners and family events, struggling to find my place in his new life. I tried to connect with Stephanie's children, bringing thoughtful gifts and showing interest in their activities. They were innocent in this situation after all. The true nature of where I stood in my father's priorities became painfully clear that Christmas. My father and Stephanie hosted a holiday gathering at their new penthouse downtown. Under the 12-foot tree were piles of elaborately wrapped presents. Jackson received the latest gaming system. Ashley got a custom dollhouse built to replicate their new home. My gift was a $100 Amazon gift card in a plain envelope with a typed note that read, "For whatever you need for school, Dad." I remembered previous Christmases when my father would spend months finding the perfect gift for me, the rare first edition of my favorite novel, the handcrafted jewelry box with my initials, the sailing lessons with an Olympic coach. The contrast was stark and painful. Still, I told myself that families change. Adjustments take time. Perhaps once they were married, things would stabilize into a new normal where I still had a place. I couldn't have been more wrong. The Europe trip announcement came during spring break of my sophomore year. My father called me to his office, the sleek downtown headquarters of Walker Developments, where I had once imagined working alongside him after graduation. "We are planning a family trip to Europe this summer," he announced, showing me brochures of luxury villas in Tuscany, the French Riviera, and the Amalfi Coast. 2 weeks, 3 countries. It will be good for us all to bond properly. My heart leapt at the possibility of reconnecting with my father. Perhaps this trip was his way of showing me I was still important to him despite all the changes. "This will be one last family vacation before you are fully independent," he added, strengthening my hope. "You will be graduating in a couple of years and starting your own life. We should make memories while we can." I immediately rearranged my summer plans, declining an internship at a prestigious real estate investment firm to accommodate the trip dates. "Family comes first," I explained to the disappointed hiring manager, believing I was making the right choice. The weeks leading up to the trip were filled with shopping excursions and preparations. My father gave me his credit card to purchase appropriate attire for the luxury resorts and high-end restaurants on the itinerary. "Get whatever you need, Franny," he said, using my childhood nickname for the first time in months. "This trip is special." I bought sundresses for Italy, elegant evening wear for France, comfortable walking shoes for sightseeing. I researched the locations and created lists of must-see attractions. For the first time since the divorce, I felt genuine excitement and optimism about my relationship with my father. The morning of our departure, I arrived at Boston Logan International Airport with my carefully packed luggage passport in hand, heart full of anticipation. I waited at our designated meeting spot, watching families and couples embark on their own adventures, imagining the memories my reunited family would create. My father, Stephanie, and her children arrived 40 minutes late. Immediately, I sensed something was wrong. My father avoided eye contact. Stephanie was whispering urgently in his ear. The children seemed confused and subdued. At the check-in counter, I noticed they had only 4 suitcases. The ticketing agent asked, "Family of 4 checking in." "Yes," my father replied without hesitation, not acknowledging my presence behind him. After checking in, my father finally approached me, Stephanie hovering nearby with a satisfied expression that made my stomach clench. "Francesca, we need to talk," he said, guiding me to a quiet corner near a row of uncomfortable airport benches. "Is something wrong with the tickets?" I asked, already feeling the ground shifting beneath my feet. "There has been a change of plans," he said, his voice detached, businesslike. "The villa in Tuscany had a booking issue. They downsized us to a smaller property with only 3 bedrooms. "That is fine," I replied, confused by the concern. "I can share with Ashley or sleep on a sofa." He cleared his throat, glancing back at Stephanie, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. "The thing is, Francesca Stephanie feels this trip should be focused on building our core family unit. The children are at an impressionable age. They need focused attention to adjust to our new family structure." The words struck me like physical blows. Core family unit. A unit that apparently did not include me. "What are you saying?" I asked, though I already knew. "I am saying that you are old enough to figure it out," he replied with startling coldness. "You are an adult now. You have your own life at college. You do not need a family vacation the way the little ones do." Disbelief rendered me temporarily speechless. He had invited me, encouraged me to prepare, watched me cancel my internship. This was not a last-minute complication, but a calculated exclusion. "You are uninviting me after I canceled my internship, after I packed and prepared." My voice sounded distant to my own ears. He pulled out his wallet and extracted $200 in cash. "This should cover a taxi home, or you could take a few days for yourself somewhere. You are old enough to make your own decisions." The final betrayal came when he checked his watch impatiently. "We need to get through security now, or we will miss our flight. Stephanie has reservations for lunch in Rome that cannot be changed." Then my father, the man who had once called me his little captain, the person who had promised me his business empire and his unconditional support, simply walked away. He put his arm around Stephanie, took her daughter's hand, and guided his new family toward the security checkpoint without looking back. I stood frozen, watching their retreating figures. Stephanie turned once to give me a small wave that felt more like a victory salute than a farewell. I remained rooted to that spot until they disappeared from view, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. Eventually, my legs gave out, and I sank onto one of the cold metal benches. Travelers streamed past me, caught up in their own journeys, oblivious to the fact that my world had just imploded. The $200 felt dirty in my hand, a pitiful severance payment for 21 years of daughterhood. I called my father's cell phone repeatedly, straight to voicemail every time. I sent text messages that showed as delivered, but remained unanswered. I even tried calling Stephanie, desperate for some explanation or reconsideration. Nothing. Hours passed as I sat on that bench, unable to decide what to do. Going back to my empty dorm room seemed unbearable. My mother was away at a healing retreat in Arizona, finding her own path to recovery. Friends were scattered for summer break. The terminal gradually emptied as afternoon turned to evening. A janitor emptying nearby trash cans gave me concerned looks. A security guard passed by twice, eyeing my stationary presence suspiciously. As the shock began to fade, different emotions surged through me in waves. Humiliation at being discarded so publicly. Rage at Stephanie for orchestrating my exclusion. crushing disappointment that my father had chosen her children over his own daughter. And beneath it all, a profound sadness that the father I thought I knew was gone forever, if he had ever existed at all. It was nearly 8 o'clock in the evening when clarity finally came. There was one person who would understand exactly what had happened and know what to do next. One person who had known my father longer than anyone and never fell for his manipulations. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and called my grandmother. "He did what?" My grandmother's voice crackled with fury over the phone. Margaret Walker had never been one to hide her emotions, and right now her rage was incandescent. I repeated the story through tears, hearing her sharp intake of breath at each new detail. When I finished, there was a momentary silence. "Do not move, Francesca. I will be there in 30 minutes, she said with steel in her voice. Before hanging up, she added, "My son has forgotten who he is dealing with." True to her word, my grandmother's black Mercedes pulled up outside the terminal exactly 30 minutes later. Despite being in her 70s, Margaret Walker stepped out of the car with the energy and purpose of someone half her age. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her linen pantsuit immaculate. She spotted me immediately and marched toward me with determined steps. Instead of the gentle embrace I expected, she grasped my shoulders and examined my face with piercing blue eyes so similar to my own. "You look exhausted, but unbroken." "Good. Walkers do not break." The car ride to her luxury condominium in Back Bay was filled with my grandmother's pointed questions and occasional outbursts of indignation. "Leaving you at an airport with $200, has he lost his mind? And for that gold-digging real estate agent." When we arrived at her building, I was surprised to see a distinguished-looking man in a tailored suit waiting in the lobby. "Francesca, this is Jackson Montgomery, the best financial attorney in Massachusetts and an old friend," my grandmother introduced us. "I have called in a few more colleagues," she added as we rode the elevator to her penthouse. "They will be joining us tomorrow morning." Over cups of hot tea in her elegantly appointed living room, my grandmother revealed what she had suspected for months. "Thomas has been making questionable decisions since he became involved with that woman, not just personally but professionally. Several longtime business associates have contacted me with concerns." She explained that while she had officially retired from Walker Developments 10 years ago, she had maintained significant legal and financial connections to the company she had helped build. "Your grandfather had the vision, but I had the business acumen," she said without a hint of false modesty. For the first time, I learned the full story of my family's wealth. My grandmother had been the strategic force behind the Walker empire, using her financial expertise to transform my grandfather's small construction company into a real estate development powerhouse. After his death, she had guided my father's early career, before stepping back to let him take the reins. "I maintained silent partnerships and kept my name on key accounts as a precaution," she explained. "Thomas resented what he called my meddling, but I never fully trusted his judgment. It seems I was right to be cautious." Jackson Montgomery nodded gravely. "Margaret asked me to look into some transactions a few months ago that raised red flags. Your father has been moving assets, restructuring ownership of properties, and making questionable tax decisions." "Is that legal?" I asked. "Some of it exists in gray areas," the lawyer replied diplomatically. "Other actions might constitute trust violations and financial impropriety, especially regarding your trust fund." "My trust fund?" I echoed in confusion. "What trust fund?" My grandmother and Mr. Montgomery exchanged glances. "Your grandfather established a substantial trust for you when you were born," my grandmother explained. "Thomas was the trustee until you turned 25, but he was never supposed to access the principal for his own use." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not only had my father abandoned me, but he had potentially been misusing money that was legally mine. "We need evidence," Mr. Montgomery stated. "Bank records, property documents, emails, anything that shows a pattern of financial misconduct." My grandmother's expression hardened with resolve. "Evidence we shall have. I still have access to the company servers through my silent partnership. Thomas never bothered to update the security protocols after I stepped back." That night, as I lay in the guest bedroom of my grandmother's condo, I wrestled with conflicting emotions. The hurt of my father's betrayal still burned, but it was now accompanied by a growing sense of outrage. The man who had lectured me about integrity in business had been deceiving me, my mother, and potentially violating financial laws. The next morning, my grandmother's dining room had transformed into a war room. A forensic accountant, another attorney specializing in trust law, and a private investigator joined Mr. Montgomery at the table laden with laptops and documents. "Here is what we know." My grandmother began, standing at the head of the table with remarkable authority. "Thomas has been systematically restructuring assets potentially to shield them from scrutiny. He has made several large withdrawals from Francesca's trust fund disguised as educational expenses but traced to personal accounts. The private investigator, a former FBI agent named Diana Rodriguez, shared her findings. Based on social media activity, Stephanie and your father have been planning this trip for months. There are messages indicating a deliberate decision to exclude Francesca after initially including her in the plans." I felt sick as Ms. Rodriguez showed me screenshots from Stephanie's private Instagram account accessed through some investigative method she declined to explain. There were messages to friends about finally getting Thomas to prioritize our family without his daughter's interference, and convincing him that adult children need to be cut loose. The most damning evidence came from the forensic accountant who had discovered documents showing my father was preparing to add Stephanie's name to company ownership papers and property deeds that were part of my inheritance. "He is dismantling your future legacy piece by piece," my grandmother said, her voice tight with controlled fury. As the team outlined potential legal actions, I struggled with the magnitude of what we were considering. "This would destroy him," I said quietly. My grandmother took my hands in hers. "Francesca, he left you alone at an airport with $200 after a lifetime of promises. He has been systematically betraying you financially as well as emotionally. Sometimes people must face consequences to remember what matters." After hours of discussion and soul-searching, I made my decision. "What do we need to do?" My grandmother smiled for the first time since picking me up at the airport. It was not a warm smile, but the satisfied expression of a strategist seeing pieces fall into place. "We reclaim what is rightfully ours, legally and definitively." The plan took shape over the next 2 days. Every action would be legally justified and meticulously documented. We were not seeking revenge, I told myself, but justice and protection of assets that were rightfully ours. "He may have forgotten who built this family," my grandmother said as we finalized our strategy, "but I certainly have not." The execution of our plan began the day after my father and his new family landed in Rome. Thanks to Stephanie's incessant social media updates, we knew exactly where they were and what they were doing. Photos of sunsets over Tuscany vineyards and selfies with Jackson and Ashley at the Colosseum populated her Instagram feed. "Making memories with our perfect little family?" Read one caption that particularly stung. The irony that she was documenting their trip so thoroughly, providing us with a timeline we could use against them, was not lost on anyone on our team. Our first action involved the business accounts. As a founding partner who had never officially relinquished her authority, my grandmother still had legal access to several key company accounts. Working with the financial team, she initiated a series of protective freezes on joint business accounts through emergency court filings. "These are temporary asset protection orders," explained Mr. Montgomery. "Based on evidence of potential misappropriation, the court has granted a 14-day hold while the matter is investigated." Next came the real estate holdings. Several properties, including vacation homes in Nantucket and Vermont, were technically owned by my grandmother, but had been used exclusively by my father for years. Legal notices of reclaimed ownership were filed, locks were changed, and security systems were updated. The most significant action involved our family home in Brookline. While the main residence was in my father's name, many of the valuable contents belonged to my grandmother. She had loaned family heirlooms, art pieces, and antiques to my parents when they married, but had never transferred legal ownership. With documentation in hand, we entered the house accompanied by appraisers and security personnel. Over the course of 2 days, we carefully removed family portraits dating back generations, valuable paintings by American masters, antique furniture, handcrafted in the 1800s, and my grandfather's prized collection of nautical artifacts. These items represent our family's true legacy, my grandmother said as we supervised the careful packing of a portrait of my great-grandparents. Thomas seems to have forgotten their significance. Perhaps their absence will remind him. The most personally satisfying moment came when we accessed the safe in my father's home office. Inside was a folder containing documents related to my trust fund. With my permission and the trust attorney present as witness, we retrieved these papers and replaced them with a formal notice of investigation into trust violations. While all this was happening, another team was securing my personal inheritance. The trust fund my grandfather had established for me was extracted from my father's control through emergency court filings based on evidence of misuse. The funds were transferred to secure accounts with my grandmother as temporary trustee until I reached the designated age. By the 4th day of our campaign, my father began to realize something was wrong. His increasingly frantic calls from Italy started at 3 a.m. Boston time, first to his office, where no one answered, then to financial institutions where he was informed of the freezes, and finally to my grandmother. I was sitting beside her when his name appeared on her phone. She put the call on speaker. "Mother, what the hell is going on? I just got a call that company accounts are frozen. The card was declined at dinner in front of important clients. Is this your doing?" His voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "Hello, Thomas." "Enjoying Italy. I hear Tuscany is lovely this time of year," my grandmother replied with icy calm. "Yes, there have been some financial adjustments in your absence. Perhaps you should return home to address them." "What financial adjustments? You have no authority to touch those accounts." "Actually, I do. Review your company bylaws. I never relinquished my founding partner status or signature authority. A detail you seem to have forgotten. This is about Francesca, is not it? Did she come crying to you with some dramatic story?" The dismissive tone in his voice made my blood boil. "This is about many things, Thomas, including your recent financial decisions, your treatment of family obligations, and yes, abandoning your daughter at an airport. We have much to discuss when you return." He exploded, then threats and accusations spilling out in a torrent that revealed just how accustomed he had become to operating without consequences. My grandmother simply waited until he ran out of steam. "As I said, we can discuss everything upon your return. Enjoy the remainder of your trip. I suggest you book earlier flights." With that, she ended the call. Stephanie's reaction appeared on social media almost immediately. Vague posts about family betrayal and jealous relatives who cannot accept change proliferated on her accounts. She shared a photo of my father looking tense on a balcony overlooking Florence with the caption, "Supporting my man through unexpected business challenges. Family stands together through everything." The irony was almost too perfect. 3 days later, a full week earlier than planned, my father and his new family returned to Boston. Their arrival coincided with their discovery that the locks on the Brookline house had been changed and a security guard was posted at the entrance. When they arrived at my grandmother's building after being denied entry to their home, I experienced a moment of anxiety. Was I ready to face him? Would I falter when confronted with his anger? Or worse, any sign of the father I had once adored? My grandmother sensed my hesitation. Remember who you are, Francesca. A Walker woman stands her ground. My father stormed into the condominium with Stephanie close behind both of them, leaving her exhausted-looking children with the doorman in the lobby. The contrast between his tanned face and furious expression was almost comical. "What have you done?" he demanded without preamble. "The house is half empty. Accounts frozen. My keycards deactivated at the office. Have you both lost your minds? Your grandmother and I would like to discuss some concerning financial and personal matters with you, Thomas," Mr. Montgomery said, stepping forward with professional calm. "Perhaps Ms. Carson could give us some privacy for this family business discussion. Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of Stephanie," my father insisted. "She is family now." "Is she?" my grandmother asked pointedly. "More family than your own daughter, whom you abandoned at an airport with $200 after promising her a family trip." For the first time, my father looked directly at me, seeming almost surprised to find me there standing tall beside my grandmother. Something flashed across his face, guilt perhaps, or simply annoyance at being confronted. "That was an unfortunate misunderstanding," he began. "No," I interrupted, my voice stronger than I expected. "It was a calculated decision. I have seen the messages, Dad, how Stephanie convinced you to uninvite me, how you planned it for weeks while watching me cancel my internship and prepare for the trip." Stephanie stepped forward, her practiced smile nowhere in sight. "You had no right to access private conversations. That is invasion of privacy." "Interesting that privacy concerns you now," said Diana Rodriguez, emerging from my grandmother's study with a folder. "These are printouts of financial records showing transfers from Francesca's trust fund to your personal shopping accounts, Ms. Carson. Would you like to discuss privacy and legality?" What followed was a methodical presentation of evidence that left my father increasingly pale and Stephanie increasingly agitated. Documents showing my father's financial maneuvers, trust violations, tax concerns, property transfers that bordered on fraudulent. "You have been systematically dismantling your daughter's inheritance to build a new life that excludes her," my grandmother summarized. "The company your father and I built that was meant to be Francesca's legacy is being carved up to accommodate your new wife and her children." "This is business restructuring," my father attempted. "Standard estate planning for a blended family. Removing Francesca's name from properties promised to her since childhood and replacing it with Stephanie's is not standard anything," countered Mr. Montgomery. "It is potentially actionable in court." As the evidence mounted, my father's defenses crumbled. He attempted threats, then explanations, then finally, when nothing worked, pleas for compromise. "We can work this out as a family," he insisted, suddenly remembering the value of that word. "There is no need for legal action that would damage the company. The time for family consideration was before you left your daughter stranded," my grandmother replied implacably. "Now we operate on legal terms." The final blow came when Stephanie, seeing the extent of the financial consequences unfolding, began to distance herself from the situation. "Thomas, we need to speak privately," she said, tugging his arm toward the door. "The children are waiting downstairs. This is getting out of hand." "Running away again, Dad?" I asked quietly. "Is that your solution to everything difficult?" Something in my tone stopped him. For a brief moment, I glimpsed the father I remembered, the one who taught me to face challenges directly. That man looked at me with recognition and what appeared to be genuine regret. "Francesca, I never meant to hurt you," he said, sounding sincere for the first time. "Things got complicated. Stephanie needed me to focus on her kids. They are younger, more vulnerable. You are so independent, so capable. I thought you would understand. Understand being abandoned, understand watching you transfer my inheritance to her name. Understand being lied to and manipulated." Each question seemed to land like a physical blow. "I understood one thing perfectly. You stopped being my father the moment something more convenient came along." Stephanie, realizing the financial situation was far more serious than she had anticipated, made a decision that surprised no one on our side of the table. "I need to get my children home," she announced suddenly. "Thomas, this is your family drama to resolve. Call me when it is settled." With that, she walked out, leaving my father staring after her in disbelief. The man who had built his identity around being a powerful, controlling figure suddenly looked lost. His new wife departing at the first sign of financial trouble. His mother and daughter allied against him with irrefutable evidence. His carefully constructed new life collapsing around him. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual confidence. My grandmother laid out the terms of our agreement. He would retain his personal assets and a role in the company, but with oversight. The trust violations would be addressed through repayment rather than criminal charges. Properties and heirlooms would be properly documented to prevent future disputes. Most importantly, the plans to include Stephanie in company ownership would be permanently abandoned, and my inheritance would be secured with independent trustees until I reached 25. "And Francesca?" he asked, looking at me with what seemed like genuine concern. "What about our relationship?" I met his gaze steadily. "That is something you will have to earn back one action at a time. Words and promises mean nothing now." As he left the condominium, shoulders slumped in defeat, I felt no triumph, only a profound sadness for what had been lost, and a glimmer of hope for what might, with time and effort, be rebuilt on more honest foundations. In the aftermath of that confrontation, life changed in ways I never could have anticipated. The legal agreements were formalized, financial arrangements were restructured, and slowly a new normal began to take shape. My father moved out of the Brookline house into a downtown apartment. Stephanie, true to form, ended their relationship once she realized the lifestyle she had envisioned was no longer attainable. Last I heard, she had relocated to Miami with her children, pursuing a fresh start and presumably a new wealthy target. The initial weeks were physically and emotionally exhausting. There were moments I questioned whether we had gone too far, whether the decisive legal action had permanently severed any chance of reconciliation with my father. During one particularly difficult night, I confessed these doubts to my grandmother. "Healing does not mean pretending the wound never happened," she told me, her voice gentle but firm. "Sometimes, the cleanest break heals best in the long run." I returned to college for my junior year with a new perspective and sense of purpose. The business classes that had once been a way to connect with my father became my own passion. I discovered genuine interest in urban development and sustainable building practices, areas my father had always dismissed as impractical. My grandmother, seeing my authentic engagement with the business world, became my mentor. Every Sunday, we met for brunch and discussed everything from specific investment strategies to broader philosophical approaches to business ethics. The woman who had helped build our family company was a wealth of knowledge far more insightful and forward-thinking than my father had ever acknowledged. My mother returned from her healing retreat transformed. The defeated woman who had surrendered to depression had been replaced by someone with newfound confidence and clarity. When I shared the full story of what had happened and the actions we had taken, she surprised me with her response. "I spent 18 years trying to be what your father wanted instead of discovering who I truly was," she said. "You stood up for yourself much sooner." "I am proud of you, Francesca." She enrolled in courses to refresh her interior design credentials and started building a client base among her extensive social connections. Watching her reclaim her professional identity was inspiring, providing a model of resilience I hoped to emulate. As for my father, his attempts at reconciliation came in fits and starts. First, there were expensive gifts delivered to my dorm room, which I returned unopened. Then came emails filled with explanations and justifications, which felt more like attempts to assuage his guilt than genuine apologies. 3 months after the confrontation, he requested a meeting. We sat in a neutral coffee shop, the awkwardness between us palpable. He looked older, the confident swagger replaced by a tentative hesitation. "I made terrible mistakes, Francesca," he admitted after several minutes of small talk. "I got caught up in Stephanie's world, her children. She made me feel young again, needed in a different way." "And that justified erasing me from your life?" I asked quietly. "Nothing justifies that," he acknowledged, surprising me with his directness. "I convinced myself you would be fine because you have always been strong. I told myself adult children naturally separate from their parents, but the truth is, I chose the easier path. Creating a new family seemed simpler than maintaining relationships that required emotional work." It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. Not a complete reconciliation, but perhaps a beginning. In the year that followed, we established careful boundaries, occasional lunches, brief conversations about business matters, a gradual rebuilding of trust through actions rather than promises. The relationship would never be what it was. The hero worship was gone forever. But something new and potentially more authentic slowly took its place. My senior year internship was with my grandmother's company, focusing on affordable housing initiatives she had quietly supported for decades. At graduation, she and my mother sat in the front row, applauding as I received my business degree with honors. My father attended, but sat separately, understanding the new family dynamics without complaint. A chance encounter with my father a year after graduation revealed how much had changed for both of us. I was leaving a meeting with potential investors for my first independent development project, an eco-friendly apartment complex for middle-income families. He was entering the same restaurant for his own business lunch. For a moment, we simply stood facing each other on the sidewalk. He looked older, more subdued, the aggressive confidence that once defined him tempered by experience and loss. "You look well, Francesca," he said. "I heard about your project from Margaret. It sounds innovative." "Thank you," I replied, noticing that he used my grandmother's name with a new respect. "It is challenging, but exciting." An awkward pause followed, filled with all the words we had not yet found a way to say. "I miss you," he said finally, vulnerability showing in his eyes. "Not just as my daughter, but as the person who always challenged me to be better than I was." The admission touched something deep within me. "I miss aspects of who we were, too," I admitted. "But I do not miss the parts that were not real. We did not hug or make plans for future meetings. The rift between us was still too substantial for such easy gestures. But as we parted ways, there was an acknowledgement that while the past could not be undone, the future remained unwritten. The greatest lesson from this painful journey was understanding the true meaning of family. Not the performance of perfect harmony for social media posts, not the financial legacy or prestigious name. Family is found in those who remain when the worst happens. Those who show up when you are stranded on an airport bench with nowhere to go. I learned that sometimes being old enough to figure it out means discovering your own strength in the face of betrayal. It means recognizing that while forgiveness might be possible, it never requires returning to relationships that diminish your worth. My grandmother taught me that standing up for yourself is not vindictive when done with clear purpose and legal precision. "Consequences are not revenge," she would say. "They are the natural outcome of choices freely made." Today, I run my own boutique development firm specializing in sustainable urban housing. My grandmother sits on my board of directors, her fierce intelligence undimmed by age. My mother designs interiors for my model units, her creative confidence fully restored. My father and I maintain a careful, cordial relationship built on clearer expectations and hard-earned wisdom. Sometimes I think about that cold airport bench and the devastated young woman who sat there feeling utterly abandoned. I wish I could tell her that the painful ending would become a powerful beginning. that sometimes the people who walk away create the space for you to become who you were always meant to be. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that ultimately led to unexpected growth? What did you learn from facing challenges on your own? Share your story in the comments, and if this journey resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life experiences. Remember that sometimes our greatest strength emerges precisely when we are forced to figure it out on our own. Thank you for listening, and may you find the wisdom to recognize which relationships deserve your loyalty and which ones you are better off releasing.